In the span of a single dawn, a 19-year-old ruler discovered that absolute power could dissolve into absolute helplessness with terrifying speed. The morning mist still clung to the Bosphorus when Sultan Osman II woke to the sound of his own empire turning against him. And by nightfall, he would understand that some forms of betrayal cut deeper than any blade ever could. What unfolded in the stone chambers of Yedikul Castle wasn't merely an execution. It was a systematic dismantling of human dignity, so methodical, so deliberately cruel, that it would haunt the Ottoman Empire for generations to come. History has sanitized this story, reducing it to footnotes about political upheaval and military coups. But the chroniclers of 1622 recorded something far more disturbing: the complete psychological and physical destruction of a young man who had once believed himself untouchable. While textbooks merely note that Sultan Osman II was killed during a Janissary revolt, the reality that contemporary witnesses struggled to document was something altogether more harrowing. A carefully orchestrated theatre of revenge that would transform a teenage emperor into a broken, pleading boy in the space of a few terrible hours. The true story reveals not just political assassination, but something more primal. What happens when those who have been brutalized by power finally have the chance to brutalize power itself? The scribes of the Ottoman court, men who had witnessed countless executions, found themselves unable to fully capture the deliberate cruelty of what they had seen. Through the accounts of court chroniclers, Janissary commanders, and European ambassadors who witnessed the aftermath, we can reconstruct not just what happened, but how it felt, the weight of absolute authority crumbling into absolute vulnerability, one terrible moment at a time. The year is 1622, and Constantinople pulses with the rhythm of an empire that stretches from the Hungarian plains to the Arabian deserts. In the heart of this vast domain, the Topkapi Palace rises like a jeweled crown above the Golden Horn, its marble corridors echoing with the footsteps of a teenage sultan who believes he commands the world. Osman II was not the indulgent, pleasure-seeking ruler that many of his predecessors had become. At 19, he possessed the sharp intelligence of a natural strategist and the cold determination of someone who had already ordered the deaths of his own brothers to secure his throne. He spoke 5 languages fluently, studied military treatises by candlelight, and had personally led cavalry charges against Persian forces. But intelligence without wisdom and power without loyalty would prove to be a fatal combination. The Janissaries, those elite warriors who had once been the beating heart of Ottoman military might, had grown comfortable in their corruption, fat on their privileges, and dangerously powerful in their unity. When Osman announced his intention to replace them with a new army recruited from the Syrian provinces, these battle-hardened veterans understood that they faced not just reform, but extinction, and so they chose to strike first, with a cruelty that would match the ruthlessness their young sultan had shown them. The psychological destruction began with the morning call to prayer on May 18th, when the gentle pre-dawn light filtering through the palace windows was shattered by the crash of splintering wood and the thunder of military boots on marble floors. Imagine the disorientation of waking from imperial dreams to find your own soldiers surrounding your bed, their faces twisted with years of accumulated resentment, their weapons drawn not in your defense, but for your destruction. The Janissaries understood that physical death was only the final act in a longer, more satisfying drama. They dragged their former master from his silk sheets, still dressed in his sleeping robes, and forced him to watch as they summoned his cousin Mustafa from the chambers where he had been confined for his mental instability. The symbolism was deliberate and devastating. The divine sultan, reducer to a trembling figure in nightclothes, watching his own replacement being crowned while he still drew breath. For hours, They played with his hope, like a cat toys with a wounded mouse. They would approach with executioner's tools, then retreat to deliberate among themselves, leaving Osman to anticipate his death over and over again. Each false reprieve was designed not for mercy, but for maximum psychological impact, to watch the once proud emperor reduced to begging, to crying, to calling out for a mother who could not save him. This was power inverting itself, the ultimate lesson in how those who rule through fear discover that fear, once unleashed, recognizes no master. The stone walls of Yedikule Castle had witnessed countless executions, but nothing quite like this deliberate theatre of humiliation. The chamber they chose was windowless, lit only by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows on the ancient stones. The air was thick with the scent of burning pitch and something else, the metallic tang of fear that seems to emanate from terrified flesh. They began by stripping away not just his clothes, but every symbol of his authority, the rings from his fingers, the silk from his body, until nothing remained but a frightened young man whose divinity had been revealed as mere pretense. What followed was a systematic dismantling that seemed to follow some terrible script. The sound of his cries echoed off the stone walls as they removed his fingernails with methodical precision, each extraction accompanied by the wet, tearing sound that would haunt the memories of those who witnessed it. The implements they used were not the clean tools of an executioner, but the crude instruments of torture, designed not for efficiency, but for maximum suffering. When they heated iron rods in the brazier, the smell of burning metal mixed with the acrid smoke, and soon after, the sickly sweet odor of searing flesh filled the chamber. The young man who had once commanded armies was reduced to animal sounds of pain, his voice cracking as he pleaded for mercies that would never come. The deepest violation came not through physical pain, but through the complete inversion of his identity. They forced him to endure acts that stripped away not just his dignity, but his very sense of self, transforming the figure who had been revered as almost divine into something broken and defiled. In Ottoman culture, such degradation carried meanings that transcended the physical. It was the ultimate negation of imperial authority, a symbolic castration that preceded the literal destruction of his body. The final act came with the methodical precision of a ritual. They positioned him as a supplicant, bound and helpless, and with deliberate ceremonial weight, they brought down the instruments of his destruction. The sound that escaped him was no longer human. It was the cry of something fundamental breaking, of dignity itself shattering like glass. Hours passed before his suffering ended, his life ebbing away in that stone chamber, while his tormentors watched with the satisfaction of a long-delayed vengeance finally satisfied. The death of Osman II sent tremors through the foundations of an empire that had seemed unshakable. For the first time in Ottoman history, the military had not merely removed a sultan, but had systematically destroyed him, proving that the divine right of emperors was nothing more than a convenient fiction when faced with organized brutality. This precedent would poison Ottoman politics for generations to come, as subsequent sultans learned to rule not through strength, but through the careful management of military loyalty, a lesson written in blood and humiliation. The story of Osman II resonates with uncomfortable clarity in our own era of political upheaval and military coups. It demonstrates how quickly institutional authority can collapse when those who enforce it withdraw their loyalty, and how the most dangerous enemies of any leader are often those who stand closest to power. Perhaps most disturbing is what this story reveals about the human capacity for systematic cruelty. The Janissaries who destroyed Osman were not monsters. They were men who had been shaped by years of service to a system that treated them as expendable tools. Their revenge, terrible as it was, emerged from a recognizable human desire for justice, however twisted its final expression. This suggests something uncomfortable about the nature of power itself, that those who wield it create the very conditions that will eventually destroy them. Osman's fate reminds us that beneath all the trappings of authority, all the ceremonies of power, all the illusions of invincibility, lies a fundamental human vulnerability that no amount of wealth or military might can eliminate. We are all, in the end, fragile beings who depend on the loyalty and goodwill of others for our very survival. The brutal and humiliating death of Sultan Osman II stands as one of history's most vivid reminders that power without legitimacy is merely borrowed time, and that those who rule through fear often discover that fear, once unleashed, recognizes no master. In an age where political leaders still struggle with the loyalty of their security forces, where authority still depends on the consent of those who enforce it, the story of this teenage sultan serves as a timeless warning. True power cannot be taken or imposed. It must be earned, maintained, and carefully guarded against the very human tendency toward revenge.